Welcome back to the belonging place where we talk about community, connection, and belonging. I'm really excited today to talk a little bit about mental health. Specifically, I want to talk about attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And mostly people early in the years, they called it ADD. But officially it is called ADHD these days. So I want to talk a little bit about why I chose to talk about ADHD. I've talked a little bit about in different episodes about my diagnosis, and it was a late diagnosis. I know that there are a lot of designated Instagram TikToks that are specifically talking about ADHD. And so I wanted to kind of get on here and talk all the way through from the beginning, kind of through diagnosis, through ways that people can compensate for some of the skills. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of my story. When I was younger, it wasn't really mental health, and going to therapy wasn't really a thing. And I didn't know what to call the problems or the things that seemed to come up and show up in my relationships. People would say that I talk too loud, talk too fast. I would lose things all the time. My keys, my wallet, my phone. There were lots of behavioral signs. I would get unfocused, or I would hyperfocus, but this was just life, right? This is just how I think. One of the reasons why I never really saw it as a deficit per se is because the positives of ADHD, because I was doing well in school, though I had to try really hard, and it wouldn't come out until later how much my executive function deficits were impacting that. But I was doing okay in school. I was doing okay socially. I was in sports and running and stuff. And so for the most part, I got into college. I did okay. I mean, both my general college and then my master's programs were hard for me, but I mean, I did okay. And so it wasn't until I started my graduate program and I was working in my internship with another therapist and there were some things that were coming out in my supervision with my supervisor, who's a therapist. And one day, I think that I was crying at one point and just talking about these things that were difficult for me in relationships. So whether it was like in my personal relationship or with my clients or whatever. And she said, "Hey, Kylee, have you ever been diagnosed with ADHD, or do you know about ADHD?" And I had heard about it like most people. And I really kind of stopped in my tracks, and I was like, no. And that led me to the process of getting diagnosed with late so I was 30 when I got diagnosed with ADHD. And from that moment to this day, I am so grateful for the knowledge that I've learned and gained, for the opportunity as a therapist to give that back to other people. And today I wanted to share a little bit about that. So I'm going to start with, for those of you who are just listening, this is a visual exercise, but I'm going to start with my hand in what we call the hand puppet. And I didn't come up with this, but basically, if this part of your brain is your amygdala, and this is your fear, fight, fawn, I'm pointing to my thumb, and I put it underneath my fingers, and this part of your brain is your prefrontal cortex, or your executive functioning. When something happens that ignites our amygdala, so we feel like we're being attacked, or we're in danger, or crisis, what happens is we flip our lid. So literally I'm putting up my forefingers, and you're living in what's called your reptile brain, or your amygdala part of your brain. And the neuroscience behind this is wild, but this is like a simple hand puppet version of this. And I want to talk a little bit about the importance of this, your prefrontal cortex, your part of your brain that contributes to mental health. So there are 4 regions and some of their functions that are specific to ADHD. That first region I want to talk about is the frontal cortex, or the prefrontal cortex. And this has to do with your working memory, your deciding like on emotions, your impulse control, monitoring social interactions, planning and organizing, initiation, completion, all kinds of things. The second area of the brain is the basal ganglia, and this has to do with procedure and habit learning, initiating action and movement. It's linked to like also working memory, controls communication from visual to attention. The third area of the brain that I was just talking about, your limbic system, it's where your emotions and memory are stored and your retrieval of memory. And it informs us of like alarming, it's that reptile brain, that alarming situations. And then the fourth area of the brain that ADHD affects is the, is the rectal activating system. And this is where it regulates arousal. This involves the sleep and wake cycle and serves as a sensory filter. So these areas, all four of these areas of the brain contribute to functions or dysfunctions of ADHD. So with all of that in mind, you might be asking, well, what actually is attention deficit hyperactive disorder? ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects both children and adults. It is described as persistent or ongoing pattern of inattentive and or hyperactivity, impulsivity that gets in the way of daily life or typical development. Individuals with ADHD may also have difficulties with maintaining attention, executive function, or the brain's ability to begin an activity, organize itself, and manage tasks, and working memory. So that definition of ADHD I'm going to break that down and we're going to talk about these different areas. But many times I hear as a therapist, but also just as someone with ADHD, doesn't everybody have ADHD in the world where we're like trying to, get the most dopamine, in these bite-sized TikToks or Instagram, like isn't everybody's attention. And yes, in the world that we live in with our social media and with other things, I think this has impacted our attention and our ability. But when it comes to an actual diagnosable deficit as far as ADHD, just to be really clear, I am a therapist that only uses diagnosis as long as it is helpful for the client. Yes, sometimes we have to use it for billing, but I'm saying as long as it can give you a name, it can externalize it outside of you, it can help you come and find compensating skills and things, it's great. As long as it is used as an excuse or as a victim mentality, I think it doesn't serve the purpose. So for everybody listening, whether you're diagnosed or not diagnosed, I think there's some things we can learn about the brain and we can learn about the process. Or if you know somebody and love somebody who has ADHD, I think this will be really helpful for you to learn a little bit about that process. So basically, in order to be diagnosed really for anything, but we're going to talk specifically about ADHD, it has to impact your life in multiple areas. So it can't just be impacting you at home. It has to impact you at home and at work, or at work and at school, or at school and at church, or at church and at home. And so basically, if you sit down with a therapist and you're just having the problem in one area, it's probably not an actual diagnosable problem, but you might be on the spectrum somewhere, some ADHD, some anxiety, I think most people have features of these different things. In order to be diagnosed with ADHD, there are three types. One type is inattentive, one type is hyperactive/impulsive, and the other type is combined for both. So I'm not going to go through them exactly, but in the DSM-5, which is the tool that we use for diagnosing things, there are like 8 or 9 areas in both the inattentive and 8 or 9 areas in the hyperactive, impulsive area. And when I'm with my clients, I will read through those and I'll have them hold their hands and put up their fingers if those areas are things that they struggle with in their lives. This is just one of the ways that I work with them on their diagnosis. So if you have 6 or more areas of these 8 or 9, then you definitely, meet the criteria for that. If you have 6 or more in both of these areas, both in the inattentive and in the hyperactive impulsive, then you have what's called combined type ADHD. And that is what I was diagnosed, combined type ADHD. Lucky me, right? And so with that diagnosis, I want to talk a little bit about what does that mean? I mean, I talked to you guys about the definition of it, but what does it look like and how does it show up in our day-to-day lives? I want to talk a little bit first about the positives. Many CEOs, many startup C-suite people, many CEOs and companies are people who have ADHD. Why, you might ask? It's because ADHD has a feature called omnipotential, which means that like you feel like you can do anything and you're capable, and as long as your interest stays in that area, or you can hyperfocus in that area, or you can create a fixed interest, like it's going to thrive. The problem with that is that a lot of times that is dopamine seeking behavior, and starting something feels like a lot of dopamine. You're digging in, and then once that thing has been built, many times people with ADHD will lose that dopamine or lose that fixed interest, and so they want to start something else. So while this is a great strength, it can also be a weakness, right? To not like maintain or be able to be consistent in that area. A couple of other things that shows up in ADHD that you may or may not be familiar with. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but there are executive function deficits, things like time blindness, working memory, initiation and completion, organization, time management, things like that. And I'm going to come back and talk specifically about some of these individual areas in executive function. But before we leave EF, I want to talk about where that is. So in your brain, in that prefrontal cortex, that front part of your brain, this is where your executive function is developed. If you have hardwiring deficits, which think of that as like a RAM of a computer or something, like there's circuits and somehow there is pieces missing in that hardwiring. There's no way to take a medication for that hole right there. And there's no way to like do talk therapy. Like you're going to have to figure out how to compensate for those glitches in the system. Hardwiring deficits or executive function deficits are a little bit like, close your eyes with me and imagine that you have a secretary in the front of your brain. And this secretary is like, she has one of those like gray beehives of hair, and she's got the glasses that like have the chains. So when she takes them off, they hang around her neck. And, if the picture were in motion, her hands would be flying in the air and like smoke would be coming out of her ears, and there would be a filing cabinet, but all the files would be everywhere, and the desk is really small, and so things are falling off the desk. This is what it looks like when you have executive function deficits. The ability to file information into the right files, the ability to keep things on your desk organized, the ability to, it's like an overworked and underpaid secretary, right? Okay. A couple of the other things that show up for people that have ADHD, there is something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria. These are like big words to basically say that when somebody gives you critical feedback, or when you perceive that you're going to get critical feedback, there is a physiological thing that happens in your body, and I call it, and some people call it flooding. It's where you're flooded, where it's almost like you can't process information. You're psychosomatically on alert. You're now in your amygdala part of your brain. Not that, you've flipped your lid because you're concerned. This can be small critical feedback, or it can be large critical feedback. But this is how people with ADHD sort of disproportionately receive negative or perceived critical feedback. Let me talk a little bit about what I mean by perceived. So there's a difference between your boss calls you into your office, or a friend calls you over, or your partner says, hey, and they describe to you something that's bothering them, or a problem that they might have. That is just regular critical feedback, and that can cause this, over-exaggeration response to that. That can cause the flooding. It can cause like speaking over people, interrupting them. There's these neurological things that happen in your defense mechanisms. That is not a perceived threat, but it's an actual threat. When I'm talking about perceived threat, I'm talking about, I call this the principal's office. So when you get a text or an email from your boss and they say like, can you come see me? I think for neurotypical people, they might be a little bit nervous, but they might have information in their brains and in their souls that say like, oh, they're just going to talk to me about yada, yada, right? For somebody with ADHD that hasn't really worked on this relationally or otherwise, there is this flooding of stuff that says, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. I'm getting called into the principal's office. Some of you can probably relate to this. Or if you've had, negative experiences, critical feedback with your partner or with your friends, and they ask you to, let's have a talk, or let's any of those triggering words, and you're just like, you're already in your like defense mechanism that says like, oh, I'm in trouble. And rejection, sensitivity for it can really impact relationships. It can really impact working and co-working relationships because people don't understand. People are, even if they're trying their very best to like tell you how to help things go well, or even if they like lovingly are wanting you to do better in your job or do better in your relationship, the way that you respond to that, the way that they get that response makes them either one, not want to talk to you about how to help things go well, or they feel themselves like they're being pushed away or rejected. So this is something to be aware of. Another thing that shows up for ADHD is recognition, responsive euphoria. I'm going to say that again. Recognition, responsive euphoria. So this, as you can imagine, is the opposite side. And this is one of the features of ADHD that I knew existed but didn't have a name for in my life for years, like way before I was diagnosed. I knew that I would work so hard on a project or work really hard at work, and you couldn't, I didn't even want you to pay me, but if you could validate me or you could give me some kind of words of affirmation, then I feel like I would do anything for you. So I knew I had this feature because for my friends, for my family, like I never had this part of me that was like, I need to get paid to do the thing. But I had this like, if you write me a note, or if you, I didn't know that it was the like positive side of the other side of the rejection. So with recognition response euphoria, we like just be aware. And this is something that like I vocalized and that I needed. Yes, I needed to get paid. Yes, there are things that, need to happen, but I learned that this was really important to me and that it would go a long way. So in my future bosses, I would let them know, hey, one of the ways that I find validation and I find it really helped me to do my job is if you can find ways to like recognize me or, and this, I think I used to think that was prideful, or that's not something that you ask for, but I've learned that that's such a motivator for me that it's really important. And the other side of that, to compensate for the rejection side, I've had to also have conversations with my bosses and people to like coach them on how to help things go well. So for example, it doesn't go well for people, well, it doesn't go well with anybody, but specifically people with ADHD, it doesn't go well on a Friday if a boss says, hey, let's have a conversation on Monday. If you don't give context and you don't talk about it, it's like the whole weekend that's going to hang over that person's head, and they're going to be very stressed and work themselves up into some kind of, lather that maybe is appropriate, maybe isn't. So I've had to say to my bosses, hey, it goes a lot better for me if you are sending a calendar invite or sending a text or an email or something, if you will, put some context in there. Like, I want to have a conversation about this project, or can we talk a little bit about, even if it's a rejection, something critical feedback, giving context to that helps my brain and my physiological body to like focus on that thing. At least it has something for me to prepare versus like spinning out of control. Other areas include, I talked a little bit about before, omnipotential. There is this sort of feeling with people with ADHD that they can do anything, right? That they have the capability, even if you don't know how to do it, you can go learn it and you can make it happen, especially today where you can learn anything from YouTube or Google. It's like, you don't have to have an MBA to start a business, for example. And so there's this feeling, and so a lot of people with ADHD do a lot of good and they build a lot of success. On the other side of that, there's what's called ADHD inertia. And this is basically the same person who can start a business, who can, internationally travel, who can, be a parent, who can whatever, all these things that people see as like that are hard and they can do those well, also just get stuck with the littlest things. Like there seems to be this choice paralysis. Like you go to you have to have your doctor's appointments, but you can't set them up. Like the idea of calling your eye doctor and calling your dentist and calling your whatever, it's just like almost paralyzing. It's like, how do I do that task? I'll give a personal example. My built-in microwave has been broken for almost a year and a half, maybe 2. And I got a different microwave and it's sitting on the counter. And like the ability to like call somebody or get that fixed is just like not a priority and seems difficult. I know it's not actually difficult, but it's just like sitting there, and I've compensated with this other microwave. And so I haven't worried about fixing it. But that is an example of like somebody who can run their private practice, but can't change out their microwave. This also shows up in just choice in general, right? You go to the grocery store and you have a cold and there's 80 million and you're just like, I can't even pick one, and you leave without buying the cough medicine. Or it shows up in relationship choices. It shows up in all kinds of things. This inertia or this choice paralysis, which is the opposite of that omnipotential. In people that have these big visual behavioral strengths, they also have these big and not so visual weaknesses that are really pulling down and struggling. And this is the underbelly, I think, for people who have ADHD, if you've only been able to capitalize on the positive side. The other part about this is one more thing I guess I want to talk about ADHD is this idea of fixed interest or hyperfocus. With people on the spectrum, they usually call it fixed interest. With people with ADHD, we usually call it hyperfocus. I think they can show up in both different ways. So for people with ADHD, I often hear people say, I can't do something if I'm not motivated. And I always laugh because, and I've said this for years, and any of my teen clients will attest, that I sort of years ago got rid of the idea of motivation. I just sort of was like, I don't believe it. I think there isn't this thing inside of us that like, oh, I'm motivated. I think there are things we want to do, and I think there are things that we don't want to do. And I think we're interested in doing things we want to do, and I think we're not interested in doing things we don't want to do. Now, where this middle ground where it says like all I need to do is figure out my motivation is where there's things that we don't want to do, but we're invested because of the outcome. So think about like going to the gym. I don't know how many people, like there are some people who love going to the gym or love to run. If you're one of those, wow, I always think runners, like what? But most people don't love to run, and most people don't love to work out, especially in like getting to the gym or putting on your running shoes, the initiation part of that. However, they love the outcomes. They love the endorphins. They love what it does for their mental health. They love what it does for their physical body. They love the camaraderie. They love the competition. There's things about it. And so in essence, they are motivated to do that thing. So therein lies the compensating tool that we need to figure out, those of us who have ADHD, if we don't like the thing, we need to figure out a motivation. We need to incentivize, we need to like reward, gamify, things like that, to be able to do the thing. But there is this, the opposite of that, hyperfixation, or that fixed interest or hyperfocus. So one of the things that one of the negative sides of that hyperfocus is that people will learn that they have a procrastination executive function deficit. So this is in the executive function world, we call it initiation and completion. This is the ability to start and finish something. And procrastination is on that second side, that the ability to finish something. But if you know that you have a hyperfocus, then you can wait until the last minute to do the project, to do the paper, whatever, and then you can use your hyperfocus as your motivation to get the thing done, and then you can turn it in. And if you get a good grade, then that validates that behavior. It is a maladaptive behavior, even though you might be getting away with it. It is teaching yourself. And at certain points, you're not going to have enough time. You're going to wait too long because you have time blindness or other things like that. But hyperfocus is something that shows up with people with ADHD. Okay, so at this point, you might be asking, like, basically, if you're a neurotypical person at this point in the podcast, you might be saying, hey, Kylee, what does this have to do with connection, belonging, community? And if you're a neurodiverse person, you know, you know the answer. Basically, it all in our life, I believe that everything comes back to our relationships, the way that we interact with people, how they feel with us. Are we safe? Are we consistent? Are we reliable? And executive function deficits, hardwiring deficits, ADHD deficits, and sometimes strengths often get in the way of those relationships. And so being able to really understand, first of all, what it means to have ADHD or what it means to love somebody with ADHD, externalizing it from who they are as a person, like looking at it, examining it and saying, okay, what is this? And then being able to compensate for those deficits is life-changing, not just for the person who has ADHD, but for all the people that are around them. So I want to talk a little bit about ways that I want to answer that question, right? Like, and the answer of that question is relationships. It is talking about just how important it is to understand people and what those deficits looks like. So I'm going to take like 5 or 6 of these examples and talk to you guys a little bit about some compensating skills. And just, this isn't comprehensive of everything, but I'm hoping that it will be helpful. When I talked about that executive, that overworked and underpaid secretary that is in your prefrontal cortex of your brain, this is where your executive function is. And I talked about having a small desk, right? Like, at work, think about your big desks. With your executive function deficit, you have a small desk. So you're putting all kinds of information, all kinds of stuff, relationships, work, goals, all the climates, the fires in LA, all the things that are like happening, elections, and you're putting it on this small desk. So things are falling off constantly. So one of the ways that we want to help with executive function when it comes to coaching is we want to either figure out how to we can't really make the desk bigger because like I said, it's a hard wiring. But what we want to figure out how to do is take things off the desk. Think about that filing cabinet that I told you that was just like overflowing. We want to figure out how to file things in the correct space. We want to figure out how to organize the office. We want to figure out how to to pay the secretary and like to work regular hours. So we call this boundaries. In the executive function world, there are multiple things that you can do to create these compensating skills. I'm going to talk about a few of them, but overriding this is creating systems or routines. If you've read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, he talks about cue setting. He talks about the ability to like set a routine. I love this and I recommend that book. But basically, when you have an executive function deficit, no therapy and no medication is going to help you. You're going to have to figure out a routine, or you're going to have to figure out a system that you can do on a regular basis until it becomes a habit. And then that habit is no longer on your desk, if it makes sense. It gets filed somewhere or it gets organized so that you can work on other things that are on your desk. And this is the idea. Being able to do EF coaching and being able to figure out how to help compensate for the deficits you have is life-changing. So I'm going to share a couple examples of those. Somebody who has a time management deficit might have, in that time management deficit, time blindness. So time blindness is this idea that we know that there's future and we know that there's past and we know that there's present. Somebody who has time blindness is stuck in present. They have a hard time figuring out future time exactly, and they have a hard time figuring out past time exactly. This can also show up in their working memory. But if you have time blindness, this might be some of the features. You might be late to things all the time, no matter how hard you try. You might say to somebody, this is how long this is going to take, and it takes way less or way more. Like you just have zero idea of how long something takes. And so if you have time blindness, just a few things that can compensate for that are using timers, using like a clock or a watch, using reminders on your calendar, using one of my favorite tools that I use every day in my life is called backwards planning. So if in the morning you need to get to work or get to the gym at a certain time, then at some point on a morning or sometime when there's low cost, so you might do your routine on a Saturday or on a day that it's okay if you're a little bit late, you want to actually time. When I set my alarm, how long does it take me to get up? Not how much do I guess, but I want to time it. If it takes me 15 minutes to lay in bed, that's important. How long does it take me to shower or take a bath? How long does it take me to get ready, my makeup, my hair, beard, whatever? How long does it take me to get dressed? Like you're timing this at least at one point. Then how long does it take me to eat breakfast or grab breakfast or put my bag together, my backpack together to get to the car? This is what we call, so if there's a time that you need to be in the car to get to work, this is what we call backwards planning. And once you time that in real time, for most people, that you don't really have to change that. You can set that. So if it takes you a half an hour to get up and get ready and showered and a half an hour to eat breakfast and do your makeup, then it's an hour. You can set your alarm for, how much time you need ahead of that. And then you can have your hard out time to get to the car at this time. I always tell people when I'm coaching them, like, make sure you have a hard out time. So no matter what, no matter if your makeup's done, no matter if you've eaten breakfast, this is the time I have to be in my car. And then you will have to figure out whatever. You'll have to do your makeup at work, or you'll have to get breakfast or not have breakfast. The second part of that backwards planning is how long does it actually take to get you from door to door? So your door to the gym, your door to work, your door to the nanny. It doesn't matter what the thing is, but like we also greatly underestimate how long it's actually going to take. And then we add time because of unknown, so traffic, things like that. So then you have your morning. I just kind of walked you guys through like a morning routine for somebody who has time blindness. You can lock it in. Somebody who has learned to do backwards planning and uses a timer versus just like their guess can go from being all the time late, underestimating, overestimating to like really, really good time management. So that's one example of a time management deficit. Let's talk a little bit about working memory. Working memory, a lot of people with ADHD have a working memory deficit, which is different than your long-term or short-term memory. It's like the actively day-to-day memory. So think about working memory like a bucket that has a hole in it, and information is coming in like sand, right? People are stopping you in the hallway, people are talking to you, your partner in the morning says something or whatever is happening, and you've got all this information. Well, somebody with working memory issue, that information is just leaking out all over. The sand is everywhere, right? And it doesn't matter how hard you try, you will always have a working memory deficit because, again, it's a hard wiring. So no matter how much you pray about it, no matter how much you do therapy about it, no matter how much you are on medication, that's not going to solve your working memory, the hole in the bucket, right? You've got to figure out how to tape it or stop the sand from coming out. And we live in a world and a society, and I love this, that like has so many compensating tools. You can write it down. We have Google Calendars or Outlook calendars. We have task lists. We even have apps that are specifically do all this. For me, for my working memory, I have a Gmail system and I have a calendar system, and I use sticky notes because I like to write, because from my brain to my hand, it really helps me. Dopamine also to cross off the list. I also use notes. I'm using a note right now. And whatever tool that it is that you can put the information somewhere. My mom, when I was a kid, she has 8 kids. She would always say, if it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist. And that has become my mantra for those I supervise and for those that supervise me. Like, it has to be written down. I have to have a place that I can go to, that I can check it off, or that I can prioritize it, or that I can organize it. And so these are a few of the compensating tools for working memory. I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to go back to that initiation and completion. Initiation is being able to start a task, and completion obviously is being able to complete it. And that procrastination we talked about is in this initiation completion deficit. One of the things that I also knew worked for me, but I didn't have a name for it for years, was what is called body doubling. And some of you are going to be like, because you didn't know the name for it either. But it's basically the ability to get something done when somebody else is there. They don't even have to be doing the thing. So I have a best friend, and when she comes into town, she lives in Arizona, we do projects, and we've done this for years. And every time she comes into town, we get so much done. It's not that I'm not capable of doing those projects. I can rearrange my shelf. I can put up pictures, but the projects seem overwhelming to me by myself. When she comes in and she says, hey, let's do this together, it's like magic, right? So body doubling, it's a little bit like if you sit with somebody and you're not necessarily tutoring them, but you're just creating accountability, right? Especially if there's no shame or oversight, because sometimes there causes stress. But like if you need to go do groceries and somebody is with you, it seems like you can talk and get the thing done, right? Body doubling also can cause some problems, so be aware of it. Like if you're directionless and you're driving and you have somebody in the car with you and you're talking, you might miss where you're going and things like that. I don't know what that's like at all. I really love body doubling. It's something you can ask for, if you need to get things done, you're sitting in your living room or in your kitchen counter, and someone can just be in that space with you. They can be doing their own projects. They can be working on their own things. I have found this when I've done EF coaching with a lot of my clients, those who are on the spectrum, those who are not, that if just having a person to just body double has made a huge difference in their productivity. I'm just going to share a few more. Another deficit is organization. This kind of comes this can coincide with the inattentive part of ADHD. So if you're like me, and not everybody who has ADHD is like this, but many of us, then you have for years, people know you as losing things, losing your phone, losing your wallet, losing your keys. These are like a big outward manifestation of that small desk, that things are falling off the desk. I have learned that to just love this part of me, and just, it is what it is, because I'm compensating for so many other executive function deficits, that this is the thing that's falling off the table. I can live with it. But if you're curious, one of the ways that you can really get good at compensating for this organization is, finding a place for those things and then creating a routine. So this might look like coming home from work and hanging your keys or putting them in a bowl, right? This might look like putting your water bottle in the sink or putting it on the counter ready for the next morning, pre-setting it out there. It might mean like this, like me, I have a wallet that's attached to my phone so that I have less objects to keep track of. It might mean, having a place that you put your phone. If you can create the space and then you can create the routine, then automatically you will come home and these things will be where you left them. If you want to keep your keys in your car because your car is, in your garage, then in the morning you don't have to go look for them. This is a compensating tool that I have. So it's sitting there. Obviously, these work in the routines. At work, same thing. If you come to work and you want to create a routine that hang up your purse or your bag or your backpack, hang up your coat, do the next steps, like open up your email, make sure, you can create these routines. These routines over time will clear the desk space, which is really what we're looking for. I hope that in talking about some of these executive function deficits and some of the ADHD things, that one, I'm hoping that the information is helpful. Two, I'm hoping that it gives a name to a few of these things. If you're like, oh, I didn't know what that was called, or I didn't know that was a thing. Three, and the most important part of this, and what it has to do with this podcast, is I believe very, very strongly in compensating for ADHD deficits and executive function deficits, and not just in ADHD, but since we're focusing on that today, this can also happen with other kinds of mental health and other kinds of executive function. But the thing for me that I have found the most joy in my life and seen the most joy in my clients is what happens in the relationships. If you can learn to compensate some of these deficits that are impacting negatively your work relationships or your friends or your romantic relationships or partners, it's just like wild the difference that it makes. If you become a seemingly unorganized person who's losing things all the time to a person who's got it together, not only do you feel good, but you represent yourself better. If you are late all the time or you can't seem to figure out how to get on time or compensate for it, and you figure out some pretty easy tools and you become a reliable, on time, if not early person, that changes the way that people see you, but mostly that changes the way you see yourself in relation to people. If you are somebody who has pressured speech, which is another type of thing that happens with ADHD, and you find yourself interrupting people, but you don't mean to, or you find yourself like answering questions more than other people, if you learn to compensate and read the room, if you can learn how to, like, even though you feel pressured speech, you can kind of look around the room and you can say, okay, how many times have I answered? And you can slow your processing speed down. You can take some deep breaths. Sometimes I sit on my hands and you can learn to like interact at what would be a regular, like, this changes so much. Another thing that I struggled with until I compensated for it was volume control. People would just always say I'm so loud. This is a deficit. I didn't know how to fill a certain space. And so I had to learn how to compensate for that. I had to learn how to use it, what we call our inside voice, which for some people is really easy, right? Like, but I had to learn, like, this is the volume of this space versus this is the volume of this space versus I had to learn in a room, if I'm sitting in a boardroom with people, where is the best place for me to sit, where I won't be as distracted. In a classroom, we call it the T zone, right in front and in the middle, where you're going to be accountable. If there was a light that was shining, it would hit you. If you're in the shadows, you don't want to sit in that space in the room, because this is going to keep your attention. This is going to keep your accountability. There's just a lot of simple tools that can help that you can help to compensate some of these deficits that make a big difference. And this is my hope. There's EF coaching out there. There's all kinds of websites. There's all kinds of information. I'm going to put a whole bunch of like YouTube videos that I love and information in the liner of this episode. Also, if you want to reach out and ask me questions, feel free to. But I just want people to feel hope. I want people to know that you're not a mess. Your overworked and underpaid secretary can figure out how to put boundaries. You can create a filing system. You can create queue setting. You can create organization. You can figure out how to time manage. You can figure out how to body double. You can initiate, you can complete, you can organize. These things do take time and they do take some compensating skills. But in a world where there are a lot of things that we can't control, I think the really exciting thing about executive function and many of the ADHD deficits is that you can actually do something about it if you take the time and the desire. I'm grateful for all of the people and all the time and all the skills that I've learned that have allowed me to be the person that I am today. I'm not usually one to like brag about my circumstances, but I started out as a therapist who was just messy, like late to turning in my notes, late to meetings, talking over people, loud. I would cry all the time. I would sit in my one-on-ones with my supervisor and they would give me critical feedback. And I just was like, I can't be a therapist. I'm an elephant that was squished into a mouse. I can't do this. And over time and love and supervisors and working on my executive function and working with therapists and like figuring out how to compensate for things. And it was painful, but I just want to, I want to be here as like a living representation that says that like you can do it. The ability to feel less messy, to feel more organized. The last job that I had before this, I became the executive function director of the whole program. And I attest that to being able to like really compensate for the deficits that I have. They're not going anywhere. My hardwiring deficits, I was born with them and I'm going to die with them. And I'm so grateful that I know, and that I wanted to share with you guys the ability to compensate for those. In conclusion, I just mostly want to highlight that, while I'm passionate about mental health, while I really want and hope that people can learn a lot about ADHD and the great strengths and the underbelly of the deficits, for me, it really comes down to relationships. Being able to take care of yourself, sleeping well, moving your body, eating well, these basic building blocks that will help you are really the key. There is this thing called Arbinger, the Arbinger Institute. In their Anatomy of Peace, they have this saying called self-betrayal. And it's this like inkling that says that the thing that I know I should be doing and I'm not doing. And for me, this is where it comes down to in mental health. Are you sleeping enough hours, 8 or 9 hours consistently? Are you drinking enough water, 80 ounces or more? Are you moving your body and walking? Anything? Are you exercising? Are you climbing? Are you hiking? Are you biking? Are you doing something that's physically getting your heart moving and endorphins? Are you fueling your body? And sometimes people are like, they're under fueling their body to do things. Sometimes people are over fueling their bodies, but like, are you putting what you need inside? And if you do these things, the impact that'll have on yourself, your self-esteem, your self-love, and in your relation to others, I'm excited, and I challenge you to like, what is that self-betrayal? What is that thing that you need to do? I hope you are able to go and do that. And yeah, I just like really want to give a shout out to all the ADHD warriors out there and people that are really struggling with this, and tell you I see you. And I know that there is a lot of good and a lot of great relationships that are out there to be had. And thanks.